Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. Today we're going to do something very simple. We're going to rank the Diablo 2 Resurrected classes yet again. Last time I did this was about a year ago, and things have changed a lot since then. Next hit delay changes, as well as some fixes for individual classes, and Sunder Charm modifications, and so forth and so on. And I feel like my previous rankings are just kind of obsolete at this point, and I need to go back over and re-rank all the classes. So I hope you'll join me today as we spend some time ranking all of the Diablo 2 Resurrected classes, and it's going to begin with the Druid. The Druid is the first class in my list, and it is unfortunately also the last class on my list, ranking in at number 7. The reason why I rank this class so low is because, well, it's just really not the greatest at just about anything. I feel like it doesn't excel in any category that it could ever possibly excel in. Let's take a look at the skill tree just as an example. First off, as an elemental character, this character does not excel past a fire sorceress or a cold sorceress. Cold sorceress and fire sorceress literally can just swim rings around this thing like it's a big fat whale in the ocean, and the sorceress is a slim, sleek dolphin that can, just swim circles around them. The other issues with the elemental tree really come into play when you consider how many points you have to spend to actually get like full use out of these. The fire tree, in particular, although it has been fixed significantly in previous patches and is actually workable now, I've done fire druid in previous patches. The main issue with this particular build is that it does require 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 points just to make it worthwhile, which is rough. It's really rough. The Hurricane Druid, on the other hand, which is a little bit less point intensive, still requires a hefty 20, 40, 60, and then, of course, if you want the duration on your Hurricane, you're going to need another 80. So it's still 20 shy of the Fire Tree, but still very, very point intensive. Moving on to the Summoning Tree. The Summoning Tree, while it has been improved significantly in patches, including the ability to summon all of your pets at the same time, which is very powerful. Being able to summon everything at once is certainly very nice. And this leads to a much more powerful version than in previous patches. It still pales in comparison to the Necromancer's summon build. And that's kind of where things go, is that, well, yes, the summoning tree is better, but again, the druid is just kind of one of those characters that is just bottom of the barrel in terms of comparison to other classes. And that's exactly what a ranking is, right? We're comparing this class to other classes, and in the process, we're trying to figure out, hey, does this summon druid? Does it compare to, say, a summon necromancer? And the answer is no. The summon necromancer demolishes it. In fact, in many ways, honestly, even the Amazon's Valkyrie is better than the bear. I think I wouldn't say the assassin's Shadow Master is, because she's kind of terrible, but in general, it's just like, yes, you can do it, but another class does it better. Like, can you do an elemental druid? Yes, you can do it, but another class does it better. Which leads us to the shapeshifting tree. Now, the shapeshifting tree is an interesting tree. In recent patches and things, the werewolf has definitely gotten a bit better, especially with the opening up of being able to use more than just simply two-handed weapons that are extremely fast, which has led to the creation of druids that have access to things like ethereal. I can't remember the name right on top of my head. The scythe that gives the decrepify proc, and in general, like, they're very powerful melee characters, but because they don't really have any kind of guaranteed hit, which is an issue, they can't really compete with other melee characters. Like, for instance, the Paladin that has the Smite ability can literally just run circles around this character, depending on how you have it set up. Unfortunately, proccing Decrepify, while very fun, is useless inside of the Ubers where you need life tap so to stay alive. And there are a lot of other considerations, but it's essentially we're in the same boat here that we were in the summoning in the elemental tree, is that other classes like the Barbarian and the Paladin do melee better than the Druid does. I mean, Fury is nothing more than a glorified version of Zeal. Um, and a lot of these, like for instance, Maul on the Werebear isn't particularly an effective skill, although it does have a nice little stun attached to it. Feral Rage, honestly, is set up to a weird point where putting more points into it actually makes it worse somehow. And Rabies is unfortunately tied to poison damage, and poison damage is one of the poorest forms of damage in the game. It can work. You can make it work, but it takes a large amount of effort to get to the point where you feel like Rabies and like Poison Nova and things like that are truly effective, because you need large amounts of negative resistance and you need large amounts of plus poison skill damage, all of which comes at a premium. All in all, the Druid can definitely be an effective character. So I don't want you to think that me putting the Druid at number 7 is, saying that it's a poo-poo character and nobody should play it, because I've done tons of fun Druids. I've done Hurricane Wolf Druids, I've done Fire Druids, I've done Hurricane Druids, I've done full summon Druids, and quite honestly, I've had a lot of fun with them. But I have to admit, even to myself, as I'm having fun with these characters, that it's a subpar class. It's subpar in just about every way that it can be subpar, and there's very little that the Druid does that other classes can't also do better. One very small thing that the Druid does have over other classes is this amazing Cyclone Armor. Cyclone Armor is one of those crazy abilities, and I know you can't see it because I'm in the way, but Cyclone Armor is one of those crazy abilities that literally just allows you to absorb massive amounts of elemental damage. The main issue with Cyclone Armor is that Cyclone Armor is really only at its best when you build the full synergies for the ability, which means that the only character that can really get good use out of Cyclone Armor is the Hurricane Druid, which means that the Fire Druid can't, the Fireclaw Druid can't, the Melee Werewolf can't, the Melee Werebear can't, the Summoning Werewolf, the Summoning Werewolf, Werebear, or Druid cannot. Basically, none of the builds in the game on this character can get access really to a full version of Cyclone Armor except for the actual Hurricane Druid, because you have to build huge amount of synergies to get usefulness out of it. So the one really cool thing that Druid has that none of the other classes have is locked to one specific build and one specific just like, what is it, 60 points, 20, 40, 60, 80 points to get the best out of Cyclone Armor. And that's the reason why a lot of the times when you see Druids, what's the build that you see them playing? It's Hurricane Druid, because Hurricane Druid has this amazing Cyclone Armor, which makes them tanky as all get out. Honestly, Hurricane and Tornado are pretty fun to play as a build. But one build is not going to carry the class to the top, and all the other builds that can't quite compete with their competitors drag this down to number 7. Moving on to the next in the list is the Barbarian, ranking in at number 6. The Barbarian ranks in at number 6, and honestly, if you take a look at one of my previous rankings, the last one that I did before this, I had actually ranked the Barbarian at number 7. And there's a reason for this. I originally had assumed that the Barbarian could not take advantage of really the elemental damage charms. Being a Barbarian, you generally don't have a lot of ways to apply elemental damage. Even Warcry, which is probably the closest thing to a spell that the Barbarian has, is not elemental. It's physical damage. And the majority of the skills on the tree all revolve around physical damage in some way, shape, or form. Even technically Berserk, because it's based on physical damage, although it can be used as a substitute in magic damage. However, the magic damage Thunder Charm also doesn't really get any effect like from this. So you wind up in this weird situation where, well, the Thunder Charms just really useful to the Barbarian. And so when the Thunder Charms came out and I ranked all the classes, I had originally placed the Barbarian at the last tippy rank 7, but I've bumped it up to rank 6 because I feel like I made a mistake. And what is that mistake? Well, I have since tried to build elemental barbarians utilizing the Thunder Charms, and I have found that, well, it's actually surprisingly effective. This barbarian right here is currently using 2 crescent moons and has basically stacked all the elemental damage charms that he can possibly stack, with the including of rings like Wisp Protector to add more lightning, the chain lightning on the crescent moons themselves, and any other kind of lightning damage modifier that I could possibly squeeze in. And the result is a character that's actually surprisingly effective in just about all forms of the game. This is hell difficulty, and let me just go ahead and kill some elites here, some ghosts here real quick, just so I can show you. Honestly, this character is absolutely insane when it comes to just absolutely ripping things to shreds, because he's built off of elemental damage. And no, he doesn't need to have physical damage to rip things to shreds, as you can see. Those guys were physical immunes, and I have no way of breaking physical immunity, and I still ripped them to shreds. So I'm ranking the Barbarian at number 6 now, because I feel like the Barbarian is definitely better than the Druid at this point, because the Druid can also take advantage of Thunder Charms. Why is the Barbarian ranked number 6? Well, primarily, the Barbarian is a melee class. The Barbarian basically has no spells. The Barbarian has no castable abilities that are ranged, really. I mean, he does have a double throw, and double throw is an interesting ability from a standpoint of a melee character to be able to throw damage at a target from farther away. But a big issue with the double throw ability is that a lot of the best weapons that you can use on a double throw barbarian are throwing axes. And throwing axes have a relatively short distance by comparison to something like a throwing spear. And I don't have a throwing spear on me, but we can purchase one real quick and I can show you what I mean. And this honestly makes the weapons just kind of not as ranged as you would think. Would be the answer. Let's actually put them on real quick, and I'll show you what I mean. So this is a throwing spear, and if I throw this throwing spear, you'll see that it goes well past this pillar over here. Of course, you can't see there, because let me try this other pillar. Well past this pillar over here. You see how it goes well past the pillar. And this is because the throwing spears have a much longer range than throwing axes. And as an example, you can see that the throwing axe doesn't even make it to the pillar. This is unfortunate because even in the one way that the Barbarian has to literally throw weapons to have some sort of ranged capability, the unfortunate side effect of it is that, well, even the axes have absolutely pitiful range by comparison to, say, a spell or even a javelin, which is a big issue. So for the Barbarian to get access to that range, to be able to hit multiple targets, to be able to dish out large amounts of damage across huge number of monsters, you've got to gimp yourself and not use things like the Lacerator. You have to instead use things like Wraithflight, which is a very nice ethereal spear. But the issue with this is now you don't have access to your amplified damage and other modifiers. So on top of this, basically you can say, without a shadow of a doubt, the Barbarian is primarily physical damage, with one exception being Berserk, and primarily melee damage, with the one exception of being double throw. Right? And unfortunately, what this also means is that the Barbarian is primarily single target damage. Single target damage, while it can be extremely effective, is limiting in the way that you can design your character. And while the Barbarian does have some very nice positives, like find item, as well as the Grim Ward ability now, which allows the Barbarian to get some pretty nice negative physical resistances and things like that, as well as some amazing buffs that is coveted by basically the entire game. it's just not enough to compensate for the fact that the Barbarian basically has no actual AoE abilities. And you might be saying to yourself, but Ginger, what about Whirlwind? Well, the answer to that question, unfortunately, is that Whirlwind is not an AoE ability. Unfortunately, functionally, the way that Whirlwind works is it actually works like a single target ability that attacks very fast. It's no different than like Zeal or Fury in that regard. As you're whirlwinding, it just kind of attacks everything around you in a like a little area, one attack at a time. And it's not really necessarily doing AoE damage like the fantasy dictates that we would see in our mind. That it's actually like swinging a blade around and just hitting everything around you in a circle, which is not how it works. So unfortunately, I do have to place the Barbarian at number 6 on the list, and it's not a bad place to be as a Barbarian, because although Barbarians are 6th on the list in terms of a lot of things, they are, however, still extremely useful characters for magic finding, especially with their find item ability. And on top of that, they could make some very fun, versatile characters, like, for instance, my Thor Barbarian, which has been an absolute delight for me to play. If you've never tried out the Thor Barbarian, you might want to give it a try because it's such a departure from physical damage that I found myself absolutely delighted at how the character behaved. I don't really know how to explain it other than it seems like being tied to physical damage is just a negative across the board in terms of Diablo because there's very few ways to reduce the physical resistance of a monster. And on top of that, even if you can reduce the physical resistance of the monster, you are then restricted from using other things like life tap, which is what you need to kill Uber Mephisto in Uber Tristram. And this leads to some very odd things. However, you can get massive amounts of negative resistance in other categories like lightning, fire, and ice. And I found that by running, say, Crescent Moons with large amounts of lightning damage charms in my inventory, I was able to literally bypass the majority of immunities in the game, physical, cold, even lightning, and fire, just by simply focusing on something other than physical damage, which is really quite fun. Let's move on to the next character on the list, and that character is the Necromancer. That's right. Necromancer ranks number 5 on my list this time. So in patch 2.6, things have changed pretty significantly for a lot of classes. The next hit delay changes, including the Sunder Charm, and then on top of that, they also modified things that interacted with the Sunder Charms a little bit, like the Sorceress's Cold Mastery, and so forth and so on. And honestly, although I ranked the Necromancer a lot higher in my initial ranking and then bumped him down for the Sunder Charm ranking, unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to place the Necromancer at number 5 this time. And it's not because the Necromancer deserves to be at number 5, it's just because a lot of the other classes are just really powerful now. It's hard for me to rank the Necromancer above these other classes, which obviously we'll be going over soon, just simply because he can't really compete in terms of the Sunder Charms. The Sunder Charms basically do nothing for the Necromancer. Maybe the Poison Sunder, like it could work for the Poison Necromancer, but for the most part, when it comes to the Necromancer is really one of those classes that has a lot of magic damage abilities. You got poison damage over in the Poison and Bone, but you got a lot of magic damage as well. And then in the Summoning Tree, we've got a lot of physical damage. And you really can't get a lot of good use out of the Sunders. I've tried to get good use out of the Sunders, even utilizing, say, the Ray Skeletal Mage, the Fire Golem, and utilizing other effects, like, for instance, the Poison skills. But honestly, it just doesn't really feel like the Necromancer ever really is going to get good use out of the Sunder Charms, unless they do a complete about face and completely fix the Skeletal Mages, which I actually have a whole video, by the way, on fixing the Skeletal Mages if you want to check that out, and we'll save that for the time. Now, the Necromancer is an extremely powerful class, though, being that he can do just about anything within the game. And I think it's very important to highlight this, is that the Necromancer, unlike a lot of the other classes, can do all content. You can very easily do any area within the game. You can very easily kill Uber Lilith. You can very easily kill Uber Iswal, Uber Duriel, Uber Mephisto, Uber Diablo, Pandemonium Diablo, and Uber Baal with ease. Depending on your setup, of course, but you should have absolutely no problem with any of the content within the game, which is why the Necromancer made it to number 5 in the first place, because, well, unlike the Druid and unlike the Barbarian, the Necromancer really doesn't have an issue with anything, whereas the Druid and the Barbarian do have some issues with certain things. And the Barbarian being tied to melee means that he's also tied to attack rating, and attack rating can be such a pain in the butt, especially when you're fighting Ubers, because it's very difficult to hit Ubers without a guaranteed hit ability, which does make it even more of a pain in the butt. All in all, though, the Necromancer is definitely the king of summoning, and if you ever want to create a summoned character, I would definitely recommend doing the Necromancer, because the Necromancer can summon a horde of skeletons, skeletal mages, golems, revives, and all sorts of other things to basically make them just absolutely insane in terms of how they approach a battlefield. Approaching a battlefield with such a large amount of minions at your disposal is just insane, and it feels like you're the commander of an army. Sometimes it can be a little bit slow, but at the same time, once you get teleported into the mix and you start telestomping things, it can be even more ridiculous. On top of that, we also have the Bone Spear and Bone Spirit builds, which are absolutely fun to create, and you can do some pretty decent damage with these. And of course, Bone Poison Nova is absolutely amazing as well. Unfortunately, the Necromancer, while he is definitely a fine character that can do all content within the game, there is a lot on the character that is kind of messed up, like Poison Dagger and Poison Explosion are not really particularly effective abilities. There are curses on the tree like Weaken and even Iron Maiden that are relatively useless at this particular point. And on top of that, we also have the summoning tree with some of the golems that don't really quite live up to their expectations. And also the skeletal mages that don't really live up to their expectations. And in the grand scheme of things, it's really kind of small potatoes because the Necromancer is such a powerful character. But there is some tweaks that could be done to the character to make the character more powerful, and would definitely increase the ranking if a lot of those abilities were to suddenly become useful. I really don't have a lot more to say about the Necromancer. It's one of my favorite classes within the game. It's a very, very, very fun class to play. And depending on your particular playstyle, you might find it boring. But honestly, I find playing the Necromancer to be a highly engaging, like almost chess-like playthrough, where you're always trying to figure out what you need to do to kind of marshal your army in the correct directions. And that's why the Necromancer made it to the number 5 slot. Let's go on to the next on the list, which is the Sorceress. That's right, the Sorceress. The Sorceress comes in at number 4. And the reason why the Sorceress comes in at number 4 is just simply because the Sorceress is one of those characters that has so many fun possibilities. You can obviously be a cold, lightning, or fire sorceress. There are definitely some very fun in-between builds, like, for instance, the enchant build that revolves around the demon machine is a very fun build that you can utilize the demon machine on, and you can get some really nice damage out of it. In fact, honestly, I think the demon machine build is better than the fireball build. On top of this, we also have the Nova build, which has been very popular in past seasons. And since the next hit delay fixes, the Chain Lightning has been extremely effective as well, which is one of those builds that has kind of been slept on until recently, because honestly, Chain Lightning is just so good now that they fixed the next hit delay problems, because it just kind of, you have to play around with it. But it used to starve itself out a lot if there were a large number of monsters, and now basically it no longer starves itself out, and you can just spam it infinitely, which is insane. And the amount of damage that it can stack up to at this point, very nice. The Cold Sorceress was ranked higher when the Thunder Charms came out, and the reason why is because Cold Mastery, which is absolutely insane, by the way, completely made the Thunder Charms just insane. And of course, you can't see it because I'm covering it up. But basically, when it comes to Cold Mastery was essentially allowing the sorceress to completely cut through cold immunities with the Thunder Charms when they first came out. Now, Cold Mastery has been nerfed so that it only provides 1/5 reduction to the monster's resistance with the Thunder Charm. And this does mean that the Cold Sorceress is less effective than she was in previous patches. She is still very effective. Don't get me wrong. With a little bit of negative cold resistance, a cold thunder, and maxed out cold mastery, the cold sorceress can still pretty much rip through cold immune monsters, just not as quickly as she could before. Before, she could literally bring like a immune cold resistant monster that was, obviously never going to be killed by her. She could break it with the Thunder Charm and then reduce that monster down to negative 100% cold res with her cold mastery, which was insane. And basically dish out double damage to that monster with her cold spells, which was nuts. And it's no wonder they eventually nerfed it. But they did let it run for an entire season before they nerfed it. And honestly, there's just so many fun builds on the Sorceress, including obviously, like I talked about earlier, the Enchant Demon Machine build, the Nova builds, the Chain Lightning and Lightning builds. There's even the Charged Bolt Shotgun build, which is pretty fun. Including, of course, Blizzard, Frozen Orb, Glacial Spike, and Ice Blast builds, and just a really powerful character in general. The reason why I rank the Sorceress at number 4 is mainly due to her inability to take out Ubers. She can do it with some very specialized equipment, like Marrow Walks, and if she's utilizing things like Meteor and some other spells. Like, you're not taking out the Ubers with a Nova Sorceress. I don't think so, anyway. I don't really know. Actually, I think it'd be fun to like try one day just for lulz. But it's definitely something that can only be done by a small subset of sorceresses, and even then, you do need some very specific equipment, and it does take some time to actually do it properly. It's not easy. Let me just put it that way. It's not easy. Unlike with other classes, like for instance, the Paladin, the Amazon, even the Assassin nowadays, they can take out the Ubers with relative ease. The Sorceress definitely has a lot of issues with this. She's absolutely excellent at farming the keys, absolutely excellent at that. But when it comes to actually doing the Ubers, this is where she kind of gets left behind. So the Sorceress made it into number 4 strictly because of her ability to just be so good in every single element, as well as, of course, teleport, which it's hard to overlook teleport and her ability to speed through the game. And she's able to pretty much do everything nowadays with Thunder Charms. Every single build is viable. There's literally nothing on this character that doesn't work. You can even make an Inferno Sorceress. I have done it. It's not particularly fun, but I killed Uber Diablo on players 8 with an Inferno Sorceress, which is pretty ridiculous. It did take me a very long time, but I did it. And on top of that, there's also some other fun builds you can do with like Lightning Mastery and Dream, or you can use Hand of Justice, the Dragon set with Fire Mastery, and so forth and so on. And it's actually quite interesting to play around with some of these alternative builds on the Sorceress, even things like a Bear Sorceress. It's definitely one of those characters that dominates the early game because of obviously her access to teleport. And once late game starts and you start to get into, like Ubers, and you start to try and do some more difficult content. I do feel like the Sorceress kind of gets, kind of pulls back a little bit, and some of the other characters kind of come to the forefront, like Paladin, Amazon, Assassin, even the Barbarian can come to the forefront over the Sorceress eventually, because they find item ability kind of makes her speed obsolete when you can double the amount of drops that you're getting from the monsters, which is why a lot of people in the end usually end up rolling Find Item Barbarians to get all those fat loots, as opposed to Magic Find Sorceresses, which doesn't, of course, place the Barbarian over the Sorceress. But my point is that as you get into the later part of the game, usually people start picking up other characters besides Sorceresses. And that leads me to the next on the list for characters that are pretty OP. And this one is going to be number 3, and that is the Amazon. Yes, the Amazon has definitely come up a long ways since my original ranking. I don't think I ranked her very good at all in my original ranking of the classes, and she went up significantly in the Sunder Charm ranking because, of course, Sunder Charms did her the world of good in terms of her damage, because a lot of the Amazon's damage is elemental, and that's just the way it is. So when you look at a character and you try and decide like where this character belongs in a ranking, elemental damage tends to be superior to physical damage in a lot of ways. First off, the majority of the monsters in the game have very, very high physical damage, and it's very difficult, or physical damage reduction, it's very difficult to dish out physical damage to monsters in this game. Whereas elemental damage tends to be far easier to dish out and also far easier to break in terms of how the character works. And speaking of this, the Amazon has come a long way as well in terms of her abilities. Dodge, avoid, and evade has been fixed, which is absolutely amazing. Her attack rating from penetrate has been fixed, so that it actually works properly now. Slow missiles got a huge damage reduction buff, and on top of that, inner sight got a buff as well, which is an absolutely amazing ability for dealing with defense of monsters, which means that you need less attack rating. On top of this, her bow tree has gotten huge buffs with the existence of Sunder Charms. Freezing arrow, exploding arrow, even immolation arrow, not ice arrow, cold arrow, they suck, and not fire arrow, because that one sucks too. But honestly, the entire good parts of the elemental tree have seen huge buffs. On top of this, the ability to be a melee Amazon is finally possible, and it's thanks to the fact that they fixed the avoid and evade dodges. And then on top of this, the Power Strike, Charge Strike, and Lightning Strike abilities were isolated from Thunderstruck, Lightning Fury, which does make them a lot easier to build for a melee lightning Zon. On top of this, Charge Strike is still one of the most powerful freaking abilities in the game, pretty much, for single target damage, and can absolutely annihilate just about any monster with one tap. If I go out in Frigid Highlands real quick, not really much of a test, but if I walk out here and just tap one of these monsters, you'll see what I mean. Like, come here, Eldritch. As you can see, immediately dead. Immediately dead, immediately dead, immediately dead. There's really not much contest with this particular character. Not only does this character honestly have some of the best abilities in the game, some of the most powerful abilities in the game. For instance, Impale is an always hit ability that can be used to kill Ubers. I've done it. Charge Strike is one of the highest single target damage abilities in the game, like bar none. Does massive amounts of damage, and with the help of the Sunder Charms and a little bit of negative resistance, can literally even murder Ubers with ease. On top of this, she has one of the highest multi-damage abilities, the AoE damage abilities, which is Lightning Fury. Lightning Fury has absolutely insane density damage, which means that when you're in big packs and you have large number of monsters, like the cow level, for instance, and you throw off one javelin and literally all the cows fall down. So she has literally one of the best single target abilities, one of the best AoE target abilities, and on top of that, she has one of the best crowd control abilities too, with Freezing Arrow. Freezing Arrow is absolutely insane, and I've built a Freezing Arrow Amazon. I have also used that Freezing Arrow Amazon throughout the entire game, all the way to level 99, and the experience is just so much fun to play. She can lock down pretty much any monster in the game that's not immune to freezing effects, and has absolutely no trouble killing anything. within the game, except for bosses, which is one of Freezing Arrow's biggest difficulties. However, it is all within the same character. And on top of that, she also has Guided Arrow, which is a guaranteed hit as well, which is just absolutely insane. So if you count it off on your hands, guys and gals, she has the best single target damage ability. She has the best AoE damage ability. She has 2 of the 3 guaranteed hits within the game. And she has the best crowd control ability within the game. She literally has a full freaking deck of abilities which she can use at her disposal. Now, she cannot use all of these abilities at the same time. And it is unfortunate. But building, say, for instance, a Freezing Arrow / Lightning Furies on is totally possible. And 100% has been done before. The Amazon is ranked at number 3 because of her powerhouse abilities and also the fact that she's able to kill the Ubers with relative ease, utilizing things like her negative resistances, the charged strike ability itself, and also the fact that they made it so that she can self-wield Infinity, which is absolutely insane. And once you get an Infinity in a Lightning Zon's hands, well, that's all she wrote, folks. Lightning frickin' Spearsons with an Infinity, a self-wielded Infinity, are so absolutely sickly insane in terms of damage output that it's... you gotta see it to believe it, but it's just nuts. The damage output they can do is just nuts. I honestly don't even know because like recently they also changed Lightning Strike, and so Lightning Strike can be spammed now. Let me see if I can show you how Lightning Strike looks when you spam it, which is absolutely insane too. But basically, now that you can spam Lightning Strike, you can basically just go into a pack of monsters, and you can just do something like this. And you can spam Lightning Strike and just kind of like murder entire rooms. Let the lightning go literally monster to monster, just dishing out massive amounts of damage. The number of jumps that Lightning Strike is capable of is 38. So when you're in giant packs with Lightning Strike now and you literally spam Lightning Strike, it outdamages Charge Strike by miles. Depending on how big the pack is, obviously the bigger the pack, the more damage. But let me see if I can find like a nice big thick boy pack in here. We need the thickest of boys packs. Yeah, here we go. Check this out. Look at that jank jumping all around. And then we've got a Possessed, and we one-shot the Possessed, and he's gone. And then we got this boy right here, and he's gone. I mean, honestly, in terms of... Oh, wow. A unique ring. Is that a unique ring? 16% Nagel. Yeah. I think can go right back in the dirt. But just honestly, just absolutely crazy, ridiculous character. Depending on what you want to do, like how you want to set this character up, just absolutely nuts. And on top of that, the physical Amazon isn't a slouch either. Set up properly with the right equipment, although it's extremely expensive, you could make multi-shot and strafe both extremely viable for the Amazon in general. Extremely effective abilities. And also Magic Arrow, which converts your physical to magical damage, allows you to bypass physical immunities. So very, very nice. And that's why the Amazon made it to the number 3 spot on the list. Now let's go to the number 2 spot on the list, and I think you're going to be surprised because that is the Assassin. That's right, the Assassin. The Assassin ranks in at number 2, which is actually going to be a surprise to a lot of people who saw my previous rankings. Because if I remember correctly, in my previous rankings, in fact, in both of them, I believe I ranked the Assassin like absolutely the bottom tier on a lot of my rankings. In fact, let's pull up my old rankings just for fun, and let's see just how far the Assassin has come since then. So here I got both of my ranking lists up. So here's my original ranking. And my original ranking, I have the Assassin at number 3. Not number 3. 7, 6, 5. So the 5th position for the Assassin. And then in the previous ranking before that, or after that, I ranked them a little bit differently. So the Assassin was ranked number 5 in the old rankings, and Well, 1, 2, 3. Again, number 5 in the old rankings. Looks like she stayed pretty steady at number 5 in both of them. Honestly, the Assassin deserved those rankings because prior to the Sunder Charms, prior to the fixes that the Assassin got, the Assassin was probably one of the worst classes. And let's talk about why the Assassin got ranked so low on previous patches. First off, the fire tree for the traps. Completely and utterly useless for the most part, except for early game. The fire assassin traps was just useless. Martial arts, basically the entire left side of the tree was completely and utterly useless, and nobody really liked to make martial arts assassins. You could make it. It was okay. It was doable. It wasn't something that you were going to be writing home to mommy about, but at the same time, it was lackluster in just about every way that abilities could be lackluster. So a lot of the assassin tree, including Blade Sentinel, Blade Shield, Fist of Fire, Claws of Thunder, Blades of Ice, Phoenix Strike, Cobra Strike, Tiger Strike, as well as Fire Blast, Wake of Fire, and Wake of Inferno, tended to be all very bad, including Shock Web. By the way, Shockwave was also pretty terrible because of its huge next hit delay issues. Then came a myriad of patches. They fixed the fire skills. They added synergies to Blade Sentinel, Blade Shield, and Blade Fury. They fixed basically the entire martial arts tree by adding in the mosaics, which has still been hotly contested as ridiculously powerful, and so ridiculously powerful that it makes the entire game trivial, which honestly I disagree with. We'll talk about that in a second. And it's actually one of the reasons why the Assassin didn't make it into the number 1 spot is because of the problems with Mosaic, and why I still think the Paladin is superior to the Mosaic Assassin, even with the buffs that the Mosaic gave them. There was also a lot of next hit delay changes, and the next hit delay changes also profited the the assassin greatly. The Blade Sentinel, which is an ability that had a huge next hit delay problem, saw very, 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 very good changes from this next hit delay patch. Fire Blast and Shockweb both had huge next delay issues and are now actually usable because of the changes. Wake of Fire was apparently also being subjected to next hit delay problems and saw a huge boost in its damage output due to the next hit delay changes. And on top of this, a lot of the martial arts skills like Claws of Thunder and Phoenix Strike were also affected by the next hit delay changes, which increased the damage output of those as well. In general, the Assassin has done a complete 180 and deserves the number 2 spot, because prior to all of the fixes, most of the Assassin, and I hate to say this, but it sounds kind of mean, but the majority of the Assassin's abilities were garbage. They were useless. Nobody wanted to touch them. Blade Sentinel was garbage. Blade Shield was pretty garbage. Fire Blast and Shockweb had huge next hit delay problems, which caused other next hit delay problems with other skills because next hit delay interfered with other abilities. So utilizing Fire Blast and Shockweb was a bad idea. The martial art tree, the entire left side of the martial art tree, nobody wanted to use pretty much in general. And honestly, when it came to this particular character, you were relegated to some very limited choices. It was lightning traps, Death Sentry, and maybe some Dragon Talon, and that was about the breadth of the character. And so the character went very wildly from, hey, most of the abilities on this character suck, to, wow, this character's amazing. Look at all these crazy things that she can do. And since then, I have built Blade Fury assassins that are absolutely amazing. I have played around with Wake of Fire and found it to be absolutely amazing. I've built Mosaic assassins, and I think that she's a very powerful assassin, but I don't think she deserves the number 1 spot. And I'm going to go over my reasons for why I think Mosaic Assassin is not as powerful as you guys claim. And on top of that, why these things essentially make the Mosaic Assassin not deserve the number 1 spot. And I think I actually have this already written down, just as a guess here. I do already have it written down. Here we go. Mosaic pros and cons. Multi-elemental, right? Very nice. Can bypass most immunities with relative ease. Very good boss killer. Good AoE damage. That's about the breadth of the pros. I guess you could also maybe tie in here into the pros, and I forgot about this. Dragon flight mobility. is nice. It's not exactly amazing because you can't go backwards, but it's nice. Honestly, if you do it properly and you set up your Mosaic Assassin correctly, you don't need Enigma because Dragonflight is more than enough. A Tele-Ami would be enough to get you across some gaps every now and then. But very nice mobility if you're using Dragonflight and if you use it properly. And what do I mean by using it properly? Well, you have to use Blades of Ice. This is important. So if you don't use Blades of Ice, you won't freeze everything when you dynamic entry into the friggin' monster pack like Rock Lee. And if you don't do this, then you are setting yourself up for failure. Basically, if you teleport with Enigma, you're vulnerable. Right, you can get killed, and that's one of the big cons about this character is it's a very eminently killable character, very easy to die on this character, and so what you do is you Dragonflight into the packs using Blades of Ice, which freezes them, and you actually also want to use the Cold Rupture Charm to make sure that the monsters are never immune to cold, which means that the majority of the time, with the exception of a few monster types that are immune to freezing effects, you can freeze entire packs of monsters with relative ease and protect yourself from death. And you have to do this, because if you don't, you're probably going to die. The character is just extremely weak in general. And what are the cons? Well, must build charges at all times. Without charges, you die. Relies on Life Leech. Life Leech randomly stops working with kicks. This is a bug that's been in the game for a long time, and it's gotten me killed quite a few times, is that I've relied on that Life Leech to keep me alive, and unfortunately it doesn't because it stops working randomly. And it's one of the reasons why you'll often see me wearing Life Tap Gauntlets, because when I'm in a situation where I know that I need to survive, I am more often than not willing to throw on these Life Tap Gauntlets and lose my plus to skills and all the other Crushing Blow and random effects that I have, because the thing is, well, without Life Tap, there is a possibility that the bug can return and I can die. And I've had it happen on stream many times, and it kind of pissed me off, not gonna lie. You could literally die building charges. This is probably one of the stupidest things I've ever seen. Somebody leaked me a video. They're like, the assassin is so overpowered. She can do freaking players 1,000 with relative ease. And I'm like, how? How? Where did she build her charges at? Did she build the charges on the monsters that she killed? They're like, well, no. She went to Act 1 and she fought like a random fallen in the Bloodmoor, and she built her charges on the random fallen in the Bloodmoor. But she was able to do players 1,000, and I'm like, well, then she's not able to do players 1,000 if she can't build her charges on the monsters. Because you literally die most of the time building your charges on the monsters. And if you lose your charges for whatever reason, what are you going to do? Run back to add the Bloodmoor every single time you lose your charges to go rebuild your charges? It's an absolutely, ridiculously stupid gameplay style. And while I will admit that it is very powerful, it's not for me. The pacing, insanely fast. So, speaking of the charges, and you have to keep the charges up, and if you don't keep the charges up, you die, and you can potentially die rebuilding the charges, and so forth and so on. Well, pacing. So, to keep those charges going, you have to keep running. You have to keep killing. And if you stop killing for whatever reason and you lose your charges, then you have to risk death to rebuild your charges. Mosaic limits your options, which basically means that you can only use mosaics. You can't use any other items, which does kind of suck. Areas that require zoning are really annoying and deadly. Specifically Uber Tristram. If you've never actually killed the Ubers on a Mosaic Assassin, you wouldn't know. But for those of you who have done Ubers on a Mosaic Assassin, if you lose your charges for whatever reason in an area like Uber Tristram, which is insanely deadly, which has a lot of monsters that can't be leeched off of, like skeletons and ghosts, you can sometimes die really easily, just like when you're building your charges, because you have to build your charges, and if you lose your charges while you're in there, you have to rebuild them on something, and things can get really dicey really fast. And this means that when you zone in and out of an area, like for instance, if you go build your charges in advance, which is what I would do when I do Uber Tristram, is I would go build my charges in advance because I knew that building the charges in Uber Tristram was a bad idea, right? So I would always go and build these outside of Uber Tristram. Your gear is always broken. Because you have no armor, because you're basically a raw sponge of a character and you rely on life leech to keep yourself alive, because you're constantly taking damage, holy crap, your gear is like always broken, including your claws, by the way. And you can't use superior equipment because of this, because literally every single piece of equipment that you have is constantly broken every single time you go to town, pretty much. And so you can't use superior equipment because it will bankrupt you. You will literally lose every single penny you have within a very short period of time. And you can't stop to look at loot, which I think is the biggest negative of the entire build in general, is that the pacing requires you to continue going, because if you lose your charges, then you can literally die while building your charges. And you definitely have to keep building your charges, and without charges, you die. So if you stop to pick up loot, you're going to lose your charges, which means you're risking death just to look at a piece of equipment, which really kind of sucks. I gotta say that when I stopped playing the Mosaic Assassin after this season, because I played the Mosaic Assassin for this season completely, one of the things that I really enjoyed was just playing a regular character again. Not being forced to constantly keep my charges up. Not being forced to constantly keep going, to keep the pacing running, because if I didn't keep the pacing running, then I would die. And this is just honestly proof in the pudding, in my opinion, to what makes this character just not be the most amazing character out there, is that I don't really feel like the process of building the charges is really all that fun. You know, it takes some time to get everything running. And of course, once you get everything running, yeah, you can do pretty well. But yeah, it's not a character for me. And on top of that, all the cons of this particular character, all the ways that you can die, all the things that I've talked about recently, is one of the reasons why I feel like it just doesn't deserve the #1 spot. And some of you guys might argue with me and be like, well, the Mosaic Sin is more powerful than the Paladin, and you're an idiot, and this character deserves the #1 spot. Well, I mean, you play your Mosaic Sin, you play your crackhead, always looking for her next fix, then. And you just enjoy that character then. I don't particularly think that mosaics are as ridiculously broken or as ridiculously powerful as people claim. I also feel like a lot of people that claim that probably haven't actually played Mosaic Assassins, because the Mosaic Assassin is a gameplay style and is a character that once you actually play it and once you get in there and you actually start to realize, like, what's going on, how you have to play it, like, you know, the constant need to build charges, the constant, you know, having to like refresh the charges because you built them wrong, your equipment constantly being broken, you not being able to stop for loot. Once you actually play it and realize what the character is, you might not be so like gung-ho to shit talk the character in general, because it's not as good as you guys think. It's powerful, yes, but there's a lot not to love about the character as well. For this reason, this is why I've ranked the Assassin at #2. Mainly just simply because the Mosaic and also the Trap builds are extremely powerful these days, and the entire character is actually functional now. It's not just Mosaic that brought this character to #2. It's the fact that the traps now work with negative resistances. It's the fact that the traps work with sunders. It's the fact that you can use fire or lightning traps. It's the fact that the martial arts tree is now viable. I mean, it's the fact that the Blade Fury tree is now viable, and Blade Sentinel is now viable. All of which has brought this character up to a level that is absolutely amazing. And her uber killing capacity was always good, even before Mosaics. And Mosaics honestly just kind of made her uber killer capacity even better. Because if you set up an uber killer prior to Mosaics, kick sends were still very effective uber killers. And after Mosaics, they're even more effective uber killers. So they can pretty much clear all content in the game. They have elemental specs, physical specs. They have trap specs. They have all sorts of different things that you can do. And honestly, they deserve the number 2 spot. And I think that they're honestly better than just about all the other classes now, including the Amazon, which I ranked at number 3, and the Sorceress. The Paladin is the only one, I think, that beats the Assassin. And speaking of the number 1 slot, that's right, the Paladin. And let's pull up one of my most powerful paladins, which is the North Star Smiter. The North Star Smiter is probably one of the most broken builds I've ever created. But let's talk about the paladin in general and why I think the paladin still deserves the number 1 spot. First off, the paladin is undisputedly one of the best uber killers in the game. Despite the assassin being a very good uber killer, I still feel like the paladin is the superior uber killer, mainly due to the fact that, well, number 1, the paladin can block. Number 2, high defense. Number 3, relatively unhittable. Number 4, extremely tanky just in general. And overall, just a very, very powerful character for killing ubers as well as just about anything else. The uber paladin killer usually utilizes smite and things like that. And Cody's barking. Hold on. So back to what I was talking about. So I can't remember where I left off. But let's talk about ubers probably, right? So the paladin has an insanely good single target ability with abilities, skills like smite, for instance. Also very good multi-target ability with skills like zeal. And on top of that, has extremely good elemental and physical damage. One of the reasons why the paladin, I think, still deserves the number 1 spot is just the fact that, well, they can pretty much do everything in the game. Whether it is elemental damage, like, for instance, Vengeance, or Holy Fire, Holy Freeze, or Holy Shock, which are very effective elemental damage abilities. Reducing elemental resistances through the use of the Conviction Aura, which you can't see because it's behind me. On top of that, we also have the ability to dish out magic damage with Blessed Hammer, which is an absolutely insane build. Not really one of my personal favorites, but definitely an extremely powerful build. On top of that, we also have the changes to Holy Bolt, which have made Holy Bolt absolutely insane. And utilizing Holy Bolt correctly, like on my North Star Smiter, you can take out just about most of the monsters in the game, with the exception of the beasts, which makes Fist of the Heavens extremely powerful as well for just about anything that you want to do. Honestly, this character has pretty much everything that you could ever want. He's a melee character. He's a caster. He's an elemental melee character. He's an elemental caster. I mean, he has ridiculous tank ability, the 75% block chance, the Holy Shield ability, which gives him massive defenses, his ability to just, like, take hits, just wade into the battle and just take hits and just laugh at it. Honestly, when you combine together the melee and the caster aspects of a character, like, for instance, in the North Star Smiter, which is probably one of my crowning achievements at this particular point for the Paladin, is that you end up with this character which is absolutely insane in terms of how he deals with the battlefield in general. And I seem to be missing all my bindings here. Why are my bindings all unbound? My beautiful, yeah, here they now they're back. Look at that. So being able to use things like Fist of the Heavens in the middle of a battle to basically squash large numbers of monsters, and even utilizing Smite to kill those pesky beasts which are unaffected by your Holy Bolts. I mean, in general, this character, this class, this entire class has so many fun ways that you can create fun builds. And I hate to say that the Paladin is the developer's favorite brainchild, but when you look at the way that the Paladin works and how amazingly useful just about all of the abilities are on the Paladin, with Holy Fire having its own build, like, you can build Holy Fire natively, and you can also build Dragon Paladins. You can build Holy Freeze natively, you can build Holy Shock natively, or you can build Dream Paladin. You can build my Godzilla, which is a pretty powerful build. On top of this, you also have Fanaticism, which is an absolutely amazing aura. Allows you to attack faster, dish out more damage, and also just in general hit more often. And then the entire combat tree, like everything on the combat tree, is useful. Sacrifice, you can do sacrifice paladins. That's actually relatively easy to do, and it doesn't require any mana, which can make it useful for characters that may not have large pools of mana or might be in situations where they need to restore mana. Like, for instance, if you're a character who relies on mana leech to, you know, maintain your pool, sacrifice can come in handy for that because it doesn't require any mana. Zeal is obviously one of the clear winners of the combat tree because it's absolutely the most amazing ability in a large number of builds. Vengeance is extremely powerful as a single one donk ability. Conversion, believe it or not, is actually extremely useful for distraction. I've actually been learning a lot more about conversion in my recent playthroughs on single player, and I have come to believe that conversion is a lot more powerful than people believe. Fist of the Heavens is absolutely amazing ability, and ever since they changed Holy Bolt, just absolutely shreds. Blessed Hammer has pretty much always been good. Holy Bolt is now amazing because it allowed it to pierce. Smite has always been amazing. Charge is an absolutely amazing one donk massive hit ability, and Holy Shield is literally used in just about every single paladin build known to man. The only parts of the paladin which might be considered slightly underpowered or not really all that useful are things like thorns, which doesn't have as much usefulness these days, and some of the defensive auras specifically don't really have a lot of usefulness, like Defiance and Prayer. But for the most part, the Paladin is definitely one of the characters that is the most useful. Pretty much every ability the Paladin has some sort of usefulness. The auras are absolutely amazing to add, functionality to other members of the party. And if you've never actually seen a full 8-player Paladin run, we did a really ridiculous Paladin run a while back. It's called D2R 8 Paladin Walk, 16 auras, all coordinated, The Crusade. And basically what we did is we ran through with literally 16 auras. We coordinated all of the auras, and we had a whole lot of fun with it. And this is something that I just don't think other characters can ever really do. You can't really ever have, you know, 8 paladins or 8 assassins or 8 barbarians or 8 amazons or whatever in a group and have this kind of synergy. Yes, barbarians can buff up other, characters. But if you have 8 barbarians and all the barbarians are buffing each other, well, then only one barbarian's buffs are ever really going to be active because you want the highest ones to be active, right? Amazons don't really have a lot of ways to be party members, like group orientated characters. But you can have one with freezing arrow doing crowd control, and you can have one with like inner sight and one with slow missile. But I mean, there's really not a lot past that except for having a whole bunch of Valkyries. There's very few characters that can buff up everybody else in the group like this, and the Paladin is definitely one of them. I mean, we ran literally 8 different auras, and we had our mercenaries running different auras, and we also ran when we ran out of mercenaries with different auras, we had the other players run things like the Act 1 merc for the inner sight and also the Act 3 merc for the static field. And so we ended up with this just absolute powerhouse of a team that just blasted through the game. And like I said, there's very other classes in the game that can do this. There's very few other players or other builds that can do this. The Paladin is one of the few classes in the game it is not only capable of being a melee character, being a caster, being a melee slash caster, as well as being a support character, which there is actually a very amazing build that has been made within our kinship called the support pally, the party pally. And the party pally literally has like all of the party auras, like cleansing aura, defiance, like meditation, so forth and so on, to the point where literally the party pally is just like your best friend. Like as soon as the party pally shows up, you've got cleansing aura, meditation, freaking prayer, just like defiance. You've got like fanaticism. You're rolling like you got like conviction in there too. I mean, I don't remember all of the auras that the party pally ran, but there's a lot of freaking auras on the party pally, and it's pretty redonkulously insane, to be perfectly honest. And as soon as he shows up in your group, you're like, oh, things are just way easier now. Like, what's going on? Like, I'm tankier. I have a lot more resistances. Like, it was just it's nuts. And the party pally also can change between different like specific resistance auras as needed, or even use salvation. All in all, the paladin really kind of deserves the number 1 spot.
He is literally the undisputed king of this game, as far as I'm concerned, in just about every way. Single target damage, AoE damage, elemental damage, physical damage. The party pally can do it all. The and on top of that, can support his team and also heal his team using Holy Bolt if you'd like to do that. Which is something else I believe the party pally does is focuses on being able to spam those really nice healing bolts at his teammates. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this new ranking of the Diablo 2 Resurrected game. And let me know if you disagree with my rankings. I mean, I'm always interested to hear what you guys got to say. What did I get wrong? Do you feel like Mosaic made the Assassin deserve the #1 spot? Do you think I ranked the Sorceress too low? Do you think the poor Druid doesn't deserve the #7 spot? Let me know down in the comments. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when I'm just ranking all the characters for the third time. And as always, keep watching.